Riley Goodrich and Anthony Barajas, two young individuals, picked the movies as the setting for their first date. During the film, Riley sent a text to her mother saying the movie was dull, but she was enjoying herself due to Anthony's company. That was the last message she sent before silence fell. When the movie finished and the lights came on, an employee entered to clean and discovered the bodies of Riley and Anthony. Riley Goodrich was born and raised in Corona, a California city with a population of just over 150,000. She was well known in school, excelling as a cheerleader and volleyball player with numerous friends. Those who knew her described her as a fun, sociable young woman who had no trouble making friends. After graduating high school, Riley earned a scholarship to Grand Canyon University in Phoenix, Arizona, requiring her to relocate for her studies. She made frequent visits back home to see her family. By the end of 2021, Riley completed her first year at college and returned to Corona for the holiday break. On July 4th, her friends threw a big celebration to mark Independence Day in the United States. At the party, Riley met a young man named Anthony Barajas, who was a year older than her. Anthony Michael Barajas, born on August 9th, 2001, was the son of Brian and Catherine Barajas. From a young age, Anthony's family recognized his exceptional communication skills. He had a natural ability to talk to anyone about nearly any topic. His parents often mentioned that his maturity and self-assurance were well beyond his years. In school, Anthony was known as an outstanding student and a talented athlete. In addition to playing soccer, he also practiced martial arts. Anthony gained significant popularity on TikTok, where he started posting comedy videos in 2019. His videos quickly garnered attention, and within 2 years, he had nearly 1 million followers. Anthony was also active on Instagram, where he frequently posted about his daily life. Although he wasn't entirely sure about his future plans, he considered continuing his internet career, though at times he entertained the idea of pursuing something else. At the 4th of July party, Anthony and Riley hit it off, spending a lot of time talking and discovering they liked each other. They exchanged contact information and continued to talk in the days that followed. After chatting for some time on social media, Riley and Anthony decided to arrange their first date. Although Riley was already over 18, she felt it was important for her parents to meet Anthony first to see if they would approve of a potential relationship. She was very close to her parents, and their approval meant a lot to her. When her father met Anthony, he wasn't initially impressed, especially because Anthony worked by creating videos for the internet. At first, this left a negative impression on him. However, as they spent more time together, Riley's father warmed up to Anthony and eventually gave his approval of Riley's choice. Anthony was polite, and his excellent communication skills won him over. On July 26th, Riley and Anthony planned to go to the Regal Edwards Theatre in Corona to watch The Forever Purge. While many are familiar with this movie, for those who aren't, it takes place in a dystopian world where, once a year, all crimes in the United States become legal for 12 hours. Before heading to the theatre, the couple decided to stop for a meal at Riley's favourite restaurant near her home. Little did they know, that would be their last meal together. After finishing dinner, Riley and Anthony went straight to the movie theatre. It was around 9 p.m. when Riley and Anthony arrived at the Regal Edwards Theatre, with the screening of The Forever Purge set to begin at 9:30 p.m. and end just before midnight. Since it was a weekday, the theatre wasn't very crowded. Only 6 tickets had been sold for the movie, 2 of which were for Riley and Anthony, while the other 4 were bought by a group of friends. Everything seemed perfectly normal. The young couple, excited for their date, entered the theatre and the movie began. Sometime later during the film, Riley sent a text to her mother saying the movie was a bit boring, but that she was still enjoying the date with Anthony. After that message, Riley never sent another. When the screening ended, the theatre lights were turned on and an employee entered the room to clean. At first glance, the employee thought Riley and Anthony were simply sitting or possibly asleep in their seats, but as he approached, he was shocked. Both had sustained grave injuries. They each had gunshot wounds to the head, and there was a significant amount of blood at the scene. The employee quickly alerted the rest of the staff, who immediately called 911. Within minutes, paramedics and police officers arrived at the scene. The paramedics quickly confirmed that Riley was already deceased, while Anthony was still alive but in critical condition and unconscious. He was rushed to the local hospital where he was placed on life support. Both families were notified as soon as the police identified the victims. They rushed to the hospital to speak with officers and provide any information that could aid the investigation. The detectives' initial focus was the movie theater itself. The gunshot wounds to Riley and Anthony's heads made it clear that they had been shot. Investigators initially considered the possibility that one of them had shot the other before turning the gun on themselves. However, no weapon was found at the scene, and neither of the victims had gunpowder residue on their hands. Additionally, Riley's wallet was missing, suggesting that the perpetrator had stolen it. This led to the quick dismissal of the suicide murder theory. Investigations typically involve collecting DNA and fingerprints from the crime scene to identify the culprit, but in a movie theater, this proved nearly impossible due to the large number of visitors. There were hundreds, if not thousands, of potential DNA traces and fingerprints, making it difficult to pinpoint the perpetrator. Due to the challenges in collecting evidence at the scene, detectives had to shift their approach. As they worked to identify the person responsible for this brutal crime, the tragic story of Riley and Anthony quickly gained media attention. The case was widely reported, and the news spread across California, leaving many people shocked and wondering how such a tragedy could occur in a movie theater without anyone noticing. In fact, some reports at the time mentioned that the public became fearful of going to the movies, worried that something similar could happen to them. This fear was understandable, given that the killer was still on the loose, leaving the possibility open that they could strike again. News of the crime soon spread beyond California, and soon the entire United States was aware of what had happened to the young couple. The media, however, couldn't do much to assist, as there wasn't even a suspect sketch at that point. All they could do was report on the tragedy. Meanwhile, detectives interviewed all the theater employees, which led to a breakthrough. They discovered that only 6 tickets had been sold for that particular screening. This was a significant lead because, with 2 tickets belonging to Riley and Anthony, it meant that only 4 other individuals were on the suspect list. The police initially theorized that perhaps all 4 individuals were involved in the crime, believing that it would have been nearly impossible for none of them to hear the sound of 2 gunshots inside the confined space of a movie theater. Officers assumed that if only 1 or 2 of them were responsible, the others would have likely heard the gunshots and alerted the theater staff. However, the investigators later realized that the movie playing at the time was a violent action film filled with loud gunfire and action scenes. This made it possible that the shooter could have used one of those moments of heightened noise to fire the shots without drawing attention. While this didn't completely rule out the possibility that all 4 were involved, it did offer an explanation as to why the other theatergoers might not have noticed the gunfire. If the suspects were innocent, they might not have detected the gunshots amidst the loud noises from the movie. Detectives attempted to gather more information about the 4 individuals from theater employees. However, since IDs weren't required for purchasing tickets, the only details they had were physical descriptions. Sources indicated that the suspects were 4 young men, likely of Hispanic descent, who appeared to be together as a group of friends. Armed with this information, the police worked diligently to track down these 4 individuals. Later, the police received several anonymous tips that led them to an address on Envoy Street in El Cerritos. A police team quickly arrived at the location and found a trailer. Inside, they encountered a young man named Joseph Jimenez Jr. Officers began questioning Joseph, but his answers were incoherent. During a search of the trailer, police discovered a firearm and Riley Goodrich's wallet. Joseph was immediately arrested and the gun was seized. Officers noticed that the weapon was the same caliber as the one used in the attack on Riley and Anthony. The gun was sent for forensic testing and ballistics confirmed it was the exact weapon used in the crime. Even when confronted with this damning evidence, Joseph continued to deny any involvement. A background check revealed that he had no prior criminal record. The police were then able to identify identify and locate the other 3 young men who had been at the theater with Joseph Jimenez. When questioned, they confirmed they were friends with Joseph but denied any involvement in the crime. According to them, Joseph had been acting strangely in the hours leading up to the movie. They described him as mumbling and talking to himself, almost as if he were out of his mind. After purchasing their tickets, the 4 friends entered the theater and took their seats. Joseph continued to act oddly, talking to himself and even shouting at times. At one point during the movie, Joseph told his friends that he needed to go to the bathroom. However, instead of heading to the restroom, he went to his car in the parking lot and retrieved a box. Joseph returned to the theater holding the box and sat back down next to his friends. When they asked him what was inside, Joseph replied that it was a gun. At first, his friends thought he was joking, but his increasingly strange behavior made them uneasy. Fearing for their safety, the 3 friends told Joseph that they were going to the restroom and would be back soon. In reality, they were too scared to stay and decided to leave the theater altogether. They later told the police they had no idea what Joseph planned to do with the gun, but they were too frightened to confront him. While they briefly considered trying to convince him to leave, they were terrified that if Joseph became upset, he might shoot them. After his friends left, only Joseph, Riley, and Anthony remained in the theater. At some point during the movie, Joseph stood up from his seat and walked toward the young couple. Riley and Anthony didn't realize he was approaching, as they were seated a row ahead of Joseph and his friends. As he got closer, Joseph pointed the gun at the back of Riley's head and fired. Riley didn't have time to react. According to medical experts, she died instantly. Hearing the gunshot, Anthony lifted his head above the seat and looked back. At that moment, Joseph fired again, this time hitting Anthony in the eye. Afterward, Joseph calmly put the gun back in the box, stole Riley's wallet, and quickly ran out of the theater. He went to the parking lot, got into his car, and fled the scene. According to the police, Joseph did not know the victims, and the attack appeared to be a senseless and deliberate act, fueled by Joseph's strange behavior that had been reported by his friends earlier that day. Authorities speculated that Joseph might have had a mental disorder or could have been under the influence of drugs or a psychotic substance. In a later statement, Joseph confessed to the crime but claimed he suffered from schizophrenia. According to Joseph, on the day of the crime, he had been hearing voices from someone he referred to as Abigail. He mentioned that he hadn't been taking his medication for several days because he was unable to buy it. As the days passed, the voices in his head grew louder. He said that these voices warned him he was in danger, claiming that the teenagers of Corona wanted to kill him. Joseph then decided to buy a gun to protect himself, and it was with that weapon that he took the lives of Riley and Anthony, allegedly acting under the command of the voices in his head. On July 31st, 5 days after the crime, doctors working to save Anthony reported that he had suffered brain death and there was nothing more they could do. This news devastated not only Anthony's family, but also his fans who followed him on social media. Despite the dire prognosis, many still held out hope for a miracle. According to some sources, Anthony was an organ donor, and some of his organs were donated to help save the lives of others. A few days later, both Riley's and Anthony's families came together to honor the lives of the 2 young victims, paying their last respects in a heartbreaking farewell. The ceremony honoring Riley and Anthony was deeply emotional, drawing hundreds of mourners. During his first hearing, Joseph Jimenez pleaded not guilty by reason of insanity. His lawyer argued that Joseph had schizophrenia and was mentally unbalanced on the day of the crime. Due to this, authorities decided to send Joseph for psychological evaluations to determine whether he indeed suffered from a mental disorder. This decision led to the legal process dragging on for more than 2 years, with the case only concluding in 2024. In February of that year, Joseph Jimenez Jr. stood trial. The defense's primary argument remained that Joseph had schizophrenia, and due to not taking his medication, he had experienced a mental imbalance on the day of the crime. Psychological tests confirmed that Joseph did indeed suffer from schizophrenia. However, evidence collected during the investigation revealed that Joseph wasn't as mentally unstable on the day of the crime as his defense claimed. The prosecution presented videos taken by Joseph on his cell phone, filmed on the day of the crime, showing him displaying normal behavior. Furthermore, the prosecution argued that if Joseph had truly been mentally unbalanced, he would not have had the presence of mind to steal Riley's wallet after killing her, a detail that suggested his actions were more deliberate than the defense had claimed. According to the prosecution, the act of stealing Riley's wallet made it clear that Joseph knew exactly what he was doing that day. The prosecution argued that if he had truly been mentally unbalanced, he wouldn't have been capable of such a deliberate action after committing the murders. One of Joseph's friends, Carlos Gonzalez, who was with him on the day of the crime, testified during the trial. Carlos explained that Joseph had suddenly started acting strangely, and after showing the gun, he and the other friends became frightened and decided to leave. Carlos expressed regret, saying that if he had known what was going to happen, he would have tried to stop Joseph in some way. At the end of the trial, the judge concluded that Joseph was sane on the day of the crime and was fully aware of his actions. As a result, Joseph Jimenez Jr. was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Currently, Joseph is incarcerated in a California state prison where he will spend the rest of his life.